A whisper in the night and a shadow at dawn. Imagine a night on the Eastern Front. Somewhere in the distance, guns are roaring, but here, in the forward zone, there is an almost ringing silence. German soldiers, exhausted from battle, are trying to sleep in their trenches and dugouts. And suddenly, a barely audible rustle. It doesn't sound like the hum of Junker or Messerschmitt engines. It's quiet, intermittent, like the buzzing of a bumblebee. At first, no one pays it any mind. But this rustle becomes persistent. It gets closer. And then, from the sky, almost silently, deadly cargo begins to fall. It's not tons of explosives, it's dozens of small bombs, but their accuracy and suddenness sow panic. The Germans, in fury and helplessness, call this nightly visitor the nightmare of Die Maschine, the sewing machine. This is the Soviet U-2. Now, let's transport ourselves to another theater of war. Dawn over a mountain gorge in Italy. The commander of a German Special Operations Unit, Otto Skorzeny, is in despair. His mission is to rescue the ousted dictator Benito Mussolini, who is being held in a hotel on a mountaintop, inaccessible by foot or vehicle. Any attempt to storm it would be spotted and repelled. And then, he appears in the sky of an aircraft with incredibly long legs and wings, resembling a giant dragonfly. It circles, hovers in the air almost motionless, and then, to the amazement of all observers, lands on a tiny patch of land the size of a tennis court. A few minutes later, it takes off with the same virtuoso skill, carrying Mussolini to freedom. This is the German Fieseler Fi 156 Storch. Two legends. Two heavenly slow movers. Two completely different approaches to the same task. They couldn't boast the speed of Spitfires or the power of flying fortresses, yet it was they who worked miracles where their faster and more formidable counterparts were powerless. What did these dissimilar geniuses have in common? And what was fundamentally different about them? Why did one become a weapon of retribution and hope for an entire nation, and the other a tool for daring special operations? Let's figure it out, and the answers will shock you. The philosophy of genius. Simplicity versus technology. To understand the U-2 and the Storch, you need to understand the countries that created them and the time in which they appeared. The Soviet U-2 Po-2, the genius of simplicity, become a folk hero. The U-2 was born in the late 20s, in a young Soviet Union that desperately needed a mass-produced, cheap, and simple aircraft for everything, for training thousands of new pilots, for communication across its vast expanses, for agricultural work. Designer Nikolai Polikarpov, who would later be called the King of Fighters, created not just an airplane. He created a symbol. What is the U-2 from an engineer's perspective? It's a biplane. Two wings, connected by struts and bracing wires, the scheme dating back to the First World War. Materials: wood, plywood, canvas. The M11 engine, a 5-cylinder radial, producing just 100 horsepower. This isn't an aviation masterpiece, it's a workhorse. But its genius lay precisely in this simplicity. Imagine the production of the U-2 during the war. Factories evacuated to the Urals, women and teenagers and machine tools. They didn't need to produce complex riveted aluminum panels. They worked with wood, a material Russia had been familiar with for centuries. The airplane was assembled almost like furniture. This allowed it to be produced in monstrous quantities. In total, more than 33,000 U-2s were built. It's one of the most mass-produced aircraft in human history. It was everywhere. It was like the PPSH submachine gun, not the most advanced, but reliable, understandable, and produced in such numbers that it literally overwhelmed the enemy with its presence. Economic brief. Why the U-2 was an economic miracle for the USSR. Cost. The production cost of a single U-2 was many times cheaper than any other combat aircraft. Exact figures are hard to find, but historians agree it was an order of magnitude cheaper than even a Yak-1 fighter. Economics is always about resources. The funds saved on one U-2 could be used to produce a tank or ammunition. Logistics and repair. It didn't require highly qualified engineers for maintenance. Any village mechanic familiar with tractor engines could figure out the M11. Repair after combat damage was done literally in the field. A punctured wing made of plywood and canvas could be patched up in a few hours. This provided incredible operational efficiency and reduced downtime. Versatility as an economic factor. One aircraft performed 10 functions. There was no need to build separate factories for training, medical, liaison, and light bomber aircraft. One assembly line covered all needs. This is a genius economy of scale in the context of total war. The German Fieseler Fi 156 Storch, technological superiority as a way of life. Now let's look at the Storch. It is the child of a different philosophy, the philosophy of German engineering thought in the 1930s, which prioritized technical perfection, innovation, and tactical advantage. Germany, preparing for a war of lightning blitzkrieg, needed eyes for its mobile army. The tank wedges of Guderian and Rommel needed someone to fly ahead, find the enemy's weak spots, and adjust artillery fire. What is the Storch? It's not a biplane. It's a modern for its time monoplane with a high wing configuration. But its main miracle is its wing mechanization. It had leading-edge slats along the entire wingspan and huge flaps. What does that mean in simple terms? Imagine that an airplane's wing can stretch, increasing its area and curvature when needed. At low speeds, this creates colossal lift. This is precisely why the Storch could take off from 50 meters and land on 20. It could literally hover in the air with a headwind. It was an airplane helicopter before the advent of helicopters. Its engine, the Argus S-10, was more powerful to 140 horsepower, and the cockpit was fully glazed, providing phenomenal visibility. This was not a people's airplane. This was a premium, high-tech tool for professionals. Economic brief: the price of tactical advantage. Cost: the production of one Storch was incomparably more expensive than a U-2. The complex flap control system, quality materials, and more powerful engine made it an elite machine. In total, about 2,900 aircraft were produced. The Germans could not afford to have thousands of them. Niche role: the Storch was the best in its class, but its class was narrow. It was an ideal reconnaissance plane, spotter, and liaison aircraft. But it was not a mass-produced night bomber or a training desk for tens of thousands of pilots. Its economic efficiency lay not in quantity, but in the quality of the tasks performed. One successful Storch sortie for correction could decide the outcome of an artillery duel, saving hundreds of shells and soldiers' lives. Resource dependency: its production required scarce non-ferrous metals and highly skilled labor. As the war dragged on and the resources of the Third Reich dwindled, producing such complex machines became increasingly problematic. Chapter conclusion: the U-2 is a weapon of mass production, created by an economy focused on quantity and survival. The Storch is a sniper rifle, created by an economy aimed at quality and a lightning strike. Both approaches were genius in their own way. Face to face. A point-by-point comparison that will surprise you. Let's imagine these two aircraft met on an invisible ring. Who would win? 1. Takeoff and landing. The art of the impossible. The Storch, here, it was the king. Its abilities bordered on magic. It could take off from a golf course and land on a forest clearing. Pilots joked that its own length was enough for it to take off. This was almost true. Its system of slats and flaps made it unique. The U-2, it was also excellent in this regard. It needed about 80 meters. But its genius was different. It could land and take off from any more or less level ground, not thanks to super complex mechanics, but thanks to its biplane aerodynamic scheme. Two wings create a lot of lift at low speeds by themselves. It was a simpleton that did the same thing as the technological German, but in a different, rougher way. Intriguing fact: the Storch could land on a rooftop. Such tests were conducted. The U-2 could not. But the U-2 could land on a snowy field, a swamp, a plowed field, and no one would feel sorry for it. The Storch required more careful handling. 2. Speed. Is the slower one the survivor? U-2 maximum speed about 130 kilometers per hour. Cruising speed about 100. It was slower than some cars of that era. Storch, faster up to 175 kilometers per hour. It would seem the German has the advantage. But here's the paradox of war. For some tasks, the U-2's low speed was its main weapon. First-person story based on real events. Imagine a Luftwaffe fighter pilot in his fast Messerschmitt Bf 109. He sees this slow, old-fashioned biplane in the sky. He goes on the attack, dives at an unimaginable speed, and misses. Why? Because his minimum diving speed was higher than the U-2's maximum speed. The German fighter simply couldn't fly that slow. He either rushed past or went into a spin. And the U-2, at this time, slowly and methodically, continued its work. Low speed made it a difficult target for high-speed fighters. It's like trying to shoot a fly with a sniper rifle. 3. Armament and tactics, the Night Phantom versus the Day Observer. Here their paths diverged completely. U-2, a weapon of psychological warfare. Its main combat role became night bombing. Pilots, often women from the famous Night Witches Regiment, would sneak up on enemy positions under the cover of darkness. They would turn off the engine and glide towards the target. This technique was called gliding on the wing. The only sound was the whistle of the wind in the bracing wires, or that very eerie whisper that drove the Germans crazy. They dropped small bombs, disrupted sleep, sowed panic, and kept the enemy in constant tension. This was not strategic bombing, it was a war of attrition tactic. And it was incredibly effective. Furthermore, the U-2 was a medic, evacuating the wounded from many airfields right near the front line. The Storch, the commander's eye. Its element was the day. It would hang over the front line with its excellent visibility. It could observe troop movements for hours, transmitting coordinates to the artillery. It was a command post in the air. Its famous operation to rescue Mussolini is the apotheosis of its capabilities. But it was almost never used as a bomber. Its task was to see and report, not to destroy. 4. Survivability and repairability. Armor made of simplicity, the U-2 was practically unkillable in terms of repair. A fuselage pierced by a shell, made of wood and canvas, could be fixed in a field workshop. The engine was simple and repairable. The Storch was more vulnerable. Its complex wing mechanization and control system required more qualified repair. Damage to the flaps could render the aircraft unfit for flight until major repairs in stationary conditions. The human factor. Stories that grip your heart. Technology is not just metal and wood. It's people. U-2, Night Witches, and the infantryman pilot. Soviet female pilots in the U-2 made 8 to 10 sorties per night. In winter, in an unheated cockpit, at -40. They didn't have parachutes to carry more bombs. Their planes were often shot down. They burned in the air. But they kept flying. German soldiers called them Nachtsachsen. For Soviet soldiers, the appearance of a medical U-2 meant a chance at life. It would land on a patch of land, blood-soaked, and take the wounded. It was part of a people's war, a war of survival. The Storch, the aristocrat pilot, and the general's taxi. The Storch pilot was part of the elite. He had the highest qualifications to operate this complex machine. He worked closely with generals, was their personal driver and confidant. His record included unique operations that became legends of the Wehrmacht. He was a tool of precision application, a weapon for professionals. Whose trace in history is deeper? So which one was better? The question is incorrect, because they were both the best, but the best at their own things. The Storch was a technological marvel, a masterpiece of engineering. It showed what an airplane is capable of when created for one narrow but virtuoso task. It was a genius of tactics. The U-2 was a miracle of folk ingenuity, spirit, and mass production. It showed that victory is forged not only by brilliant designers, but also by simple people in factories and fields, and by brave pilots in the cold night sky. It was a genius of strategy. The Storch inspires admiration. The U-2 makes you cry with pride. The trace of the Storch in history is like the trace of an elegant bird's foot in the sand. Beautiful, unique, but the wind of time easily blows it away. The trace of the U-2 is a rut cut by 1,000 carts on a country road. It is deep, it cannot be erased. It is the trace of history itself, the trace of a people who endured. Friends, that concludes our saga of the two heavenly legends. I hope you found this time interesting and learned something new. If these stories made your heart race, if you gained respect for these slow movers, then do the following: click the thumbs up on this video. It's the best thanks for the author. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Even more incredible stories from the world of aviation and history await you. The most important thing, write in the comments. Which one do you choose? The genius simplicity of the U-2 or the technological perfection of the Storch? Which aircraft do you think made a greater contribution to victory? Your opinion builds our community. I look forward to a heated debate and interesting thoughts. Thank you for being with us. Until we meet again in the skies of history.